Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101, Dancing Moonbeams. I thought I would try some of the new figures from nature set number 30 with some crepuscular rays, in other words, moonbeams in this case. Okay, I've established my two focal points, and I'm establishing the structure here with the tree trunk. These will provide the framing and structure of the scene. A lot of times you can stamp out your focal points, your figures later on in the process, but in the case of figures like this, you have to establish them first because they are open designs, so you can't just stamp them over something and have them show up in front of it. You have to mask them off in some ways. Establishing some filler textures between the two trees with the sedge filler here. And we have that background now, and I'm going to establish a light source. This is the hot sun, but when you stamp it in blue and do your tones in cool tones, it could just be a moon. Okay, we're going in and filling in the additional area in that sky with the cloud cumulus. After you ink it up, you wipe off the sides, and always point the cloud cumulus in the direction of your light source. So I'm rotating my cloud around so that the billows are always facing, again, towards that light source. And being careful not to stamp over my moon because I want that to be the illuminating source of the scene. Okay, now we're going in with some shading here. But in doing so, what you're doing with shading is that you are also, at the same time, establishing your lighting. So one of the things that people often have questions about is, how do you do lighting in a scene? Well, in order to retain and represent light within a scene when you're working on a white piece of paper, what you're doing is you're not really adding in the light into it because the paper is already white. So what you're doing is you're shading, but you're doing shading in a strategic way so as to represent the idea of the light source in the sky, in this case it's the moon, and reflected light. So you don't tone out all of your clouds and all of your, say, meadow. And around the base of the trees, you notice it's getting darker with my use of shading. In this case, tones, different versions of blue. And that represents shadows, and I'm staying out of my illuminated areas as I get darker and darker with incrementally darker values of blue in this case. Okay, so one of the things that people get the, within, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, the whole idea of lighting and shade. But sometimes what you have to be careful about is they use their darker tones as much as they did the lighter tones that they had already applied, and then they lose that lighting. So what you do is when you're moving into darker tones, in this case, I'm using black. I've gone all the way through light blue, medium blue, dark blue, and now I'm working on black, but I'm staying more perimeter oriented with it. Okay, but you also use kind of drier versions of your darker tones so that you can get much lighter versions of those darker tones. Okay, and that's that with the lighting in there. Now I'm going in and kind of hitting some areas with some very light versions of alcohol inks, and now I'm going in with colored pencils because colored pencils are much more conducive for getting kind of detailed areas colored in or shaded. In this case, like if you want to do a little bit of a shadow underneath your figure there, underneath her feet, like she's casting a shadow, colored pencils are really perfect for that. Okay, now watch this area down below. I'm going in here with the tiny rocks small, but look at this meadow area, the grass. Look at that extra texturing down there and kind of the contrast it brings. It's kind of a sharp, kind of, in this case, rocks, but kind of mixed in with that grassy area, and it really gives it a nice kind of textural variety. Going in and adding a little bit of color to my figure. I didn't want to make it too bright. Her dress is supposed to, you know, be white in this case. You make it whatever color you want, but I thought in the moonlight it would reflect more light if it's white. Okay, now we've added colors and we've gotten things darker and darker, more media on there. Now, white pigmenting is a nice way to go back in and add a soft kind of white glow to the scene. It's a textural change from what we've been doing before. It's very light and billowy, which is perfect for soft lighting, and in this case, used on those at the base of the tree there, like it's mist or light hitting that side of the tree. And it also provides a nice kind of textural background. Look how soft and billowy those clouds look like, because I've, one, retained some of the white or lighter, kind of close to the white of the page, value of the white piece of paper on those clouds, but then I go back in and add additional white back into it with the pigment ink, adding some crisp little highlights with that acrylic paint pen. Now we're going in with that same pigment ink that we've just used, but we're masking off some light beams. They're emanating right from the center of that moon. So I have these two pieces of paper, and I just make my moonbeams. I like making them different sizes, different widths. But what I also like doing is making them different strengths, okay? So you add a little bit more on some of the beams, and on some of the beams you make them weaker. Usually my big wide beams are kind of weaker, and my kind of narrow skinny beams are usually make them a little bit stronger. Look at that. Now see, I have that beam going in back of her. Now this beam will go in front of her, so that'll give a lot of dimension to the scene. It makes those beams look more three-dimensional. Now watch this beam right here. I'm putting it behind one tree and in front of the other. See, it's in back of that front one. Now this beam will go in front of both trees like that, so you have kind of this weaving of light happening. Adding in some foreground elements here with StazOn ink so that it'll stamp right over my colored pencil work. Kind of capping off the top of the scene with some foreground overhang. Kind of frames off the scene really nicely up above. Going in and adding these glowing orbs, kind of giving some light into some of these darker, less interesting areas. So it kind of adds this extra kind of floating texture in the scene. I don't know what they represent. They could represent fireflies or something like that, or just kind of little magical orbs, or I put some of the little orbs in the light beam, so maybe it could be like a lens flare or something like that you would get, you know, if you're shooting a photograph right directly into the light. And it's just kind of a fun little effect. Okay, I've matted my piece here, and I'm adding in some extra word stamps, and I also spray sealed my scene. But I'm just going right over it with these word stamps, and then what I do is I spray seal it again to seal those words within kind of two layers of sealant. Adding a little signature here with the date. A few little kind of finishing touches with some highlights, and that will make the scene. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching.